On December 7, 1941, President Roosevelt was at the helm when this nation was forever changed. In a new book, author Craig Shirley tracks that transformation and the lessons of Pearl Harbor. Chuck Todd recently sat down with Shirley and began by asking him about the genesis of the book.
What I wanted to do, Chuck, was to take the reader and try to put them in the moment and see what America was going through in that historic month, from the 1st to the 31st, through the eyes of their parents or their grandparents or their great-grandparents. There have been many wonderful books written about Franklin Roosevelt or Eleanor Roosevelt or the cabinet or the War Department or what was going on with the generals and admirals during that period. But there's never been a book that was from the perspective of the American people who were ultimately going to be the ones asked to make the sacrifice. So that's what I tried to accomplish.
Yeah, you know, here's a couple of extras. On the morning of December 7th, isolationist America was at peace. By the morning of December 8th, internationalist America was at war, and it became forever an altered country. I mean, it really is sort of that defining moniker of the country.
Exactly.
Majority moving from an isolationist point of view.
Yeah, that is really the bright line, December 7th, between the America of the past and the America of the future. You know, from the time of Washington, because he had, in his farewell address.
Remember, it was not a state that was attacked. Like, think about it to this day. That's what, you know, we look back on it, Hawaii's a state, and we think, oh my God, a state was attacked. This is sort of
but
a
it was
remote,
a territory.
But this is sort of a remote territory.
Well, but nobody, and that's a good point, because very few people in America on December 7th could find Hawaii on a map. There were people who thought Hawaii was off of New Jersey. You know, one congressman several days after said Pearl Harbor should be in the middle of America where it belongs.
You know, it's interesting. There's also, the way you wrote this, it made me think of 9/11.
Right.
You talk about the impact on Washington. It was changed radically and forever. Machine gun nests went up in all of the federal buildings. Armed guards with fixed bayonets were posted at the entrance to all federal buildings. The White House gates were closed, and for the first time, members of Congress were issued ID cards to enter the Capitol. Hey, that's every day.
Right. But it wasn't then. Yeah. Washington was an open city. Is that you could, you know, there was a gate around the White House, but the gates themselves were open.
You could have walked in.
Anybody could have walked up, knocked on the door. The Congress was utterly and completely open, including, you know, the West Facade. You know, I used to jog up those steps, which have been closed since 9/11 and have never been reopened. So, but Washington did become an armed camp after December 7th very quickly. There were guard towers that were put on the White House lawn.
Walk me through sort of, you talk about America culturally. I mean, it was, you had your Washington, you had what were the average folks in the Midwest thinking, and like some of these days in the life?
They were not thinking about war in Europe, and they really weren't thinking about war in the Pacific. What they were thinking about on December 6th, they were listening to the radio, and because everybody listened to the radio, and they were listening to Fibber McGee and Maui, and they were listening to Bob Hope, and they were listening to Shirley Temple. They were listening to local programming, local farm reports, local news reports. That night, when they were going to the movies, and they were, because the average American went to the movies twice a week.
How about that?
They were going to see the Maltese Falcon. They were going to see Dumbo. They were going to see Meet John Doe or Citizen Kane or another movie called International Squadron starring Ronald Reagan.
And then 2 years later, when they went to the movies, every movie was about
everything
the war.
had a war theme.
Every movie was about the war.
Back to Bataan. You know, they died with their boots on. Everything had a war theme. And every movie also implored America to buy war bonds.
All right, the growing tension with the Japanese. Mm-hmm. You sort of get into that in almost a personal way. Walk me through that.
Well, they had taken on, there had been a shogunate culture that had grown up in Japan over the 20s and 30s and had become increasingly militaristic. They had resigned from the League of Nations. They had invaded Manchuria. They had invaded East China. They had put in over 100,000 troops.
Never mind the Japan-Russo War at the beginning of the century.
That's right, anyway, exactly. Yeah. Where they also attacked the Russian fleet in Vladivostok without declaring war first. So they were becoming increasingly militaristic. And they also signed, of course, the Tripartite Pact with Germany and with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. So, but our concern was their treatment of in Indochina of the civilians of Indochina and China. So our negotiations with Japan were not about keeping us out of war with Japan, but it was about getting Japan to withdraw their forces from Asia.
All right, Craig Shirley. The book is December 1941, and it is, like I said, it may be daunting, but it's not at all. It's these days in the life. Every chapter is a day. I love sort of in-the-moment history like this, so congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Craig, thanks for coming on.
You bet.